didn't have a great knowledge in the country, in Ireland, of where we were going, what the climate would be like, whether it would be bush, whether it would be jungle, whether it would be built-up cities. So really we were very unprepared at that stage.
My mother did not know where I was going, the Lord have mercy on her now. She came to the Cora here to see me off. My dad was dead since 47, but she did not have an idea where I was going.
We were looking up on maps to see where was the place, and we couldn't find it on the maps. And we were volunteering to go to this place.
Don't forget, we were only 3 weeks getting together, and there was lads going out on patrol and still affected by inoculations and various other things. They weren't the heat. On top of that, inoculations against malaria, typhoid, you name it. You had about 10 inoculations in one day. Teeth extractions, medicals, and this, that, and the other. You didn't get time to think.
An 16 fihid de Júl 1960, bhalig an héad grúpa comádathe síochána le chéile ag Balladonal, áitir á Itláin Americánacha, Globemaster C-124s agus Hercules C-130s, ag fannach chun na saidúrí a chuairteach in Afric. Bhí fear camera Archie Rayside an 10 bhal gon airchóir a bhí a taistil leis an Cathlán.
And we had a plastic bag like a child would have going on a picnic with some sandwiches. That was our rations, if you like. You see the lads going on board with a little plastic bag in their hand.
So we were off to the great adventure. These massive planes. God, how are they going to get off the ground?
I remember there was fellas getting on the plane, holding their hand over their arm, and if anybody brushed against them, there was a squeal and you could get a belt in the jaw. Or after having the smallpox vaccination. At this stage it had come up into the big blister of a thing.
In the early days, we went out in the bull's wool, a heavy woolen tunic which was buttoned up to the neck, and the boots were the old studded boots, the hobnail boots.
We were so far behind. I'd say secretly, probably people some of them were laughing at us. Like the Americans, they couldn't believe where are these coming from.
We were kind of a tourist attraction type. All the Americans were pointing at us and they thought we were going to the North Pole, in fact, one fella said.
Deire le cuid go na fear néal codalta áil, ach bhí cuid eile acu uafásach tín, fása sa detal siad trasna na Hórpa agus a raig go dro na Hafrica chuig.
We flew to Châteauroux in France. We then flew to Tripoli, to an American base. We then flew to Congo, and that's when the heat hit it.
I thought I was at the walk in front of a jet engine because the heat was blowing off the desert. And we had never experienced heat like that in our lives. So anyway, we discovered it wasn't a jet engine that was going to burn us. It was just the heat off the desert.
When I landed in it first, my biggest disappointment, after watching Tarzan films and stuff like that, my biggest disappointment when I looked out the back door of the aeroplane we were on, there were no trees. There was only little sort of bush scrub. I was expecting big, tall trees.
Standards were much higher. Like Elizabethville and Leopoldville were huge, big modern cities, big skyscraper hotels, outdoor swimming pools. There was no comparison to Dublin.
Ach níor inis an rairc sin an scéal ar fad. Brannú neas splachas ar Congo na Belige ar an tríochúil lá de bheithimh, agus níor bhada go raibh an tír ina cír chúil. Deir an tarmamach in ai ifigig Belgacha a bhí bán, agus thosa siad ag marú is ag scrisa. Dír Patrice Lumumba an príomh aran nua tufa, cabhair ar na náisiún Aontaithe. A chug an scéal an nonas nuair a bhris ceantar rachmasa Katanga an chuideala an Congo, faoi cheannaireacht Moise Tshombe. Bhí coga catharga ar bonna Katanga inis idir na Conicat, Lantóirí Tshombe, agus na Baluba a bhí a gcuine cinenne an uachtar an Tshombe, scara leis an chuideala an Congo.
The Balubas come down to Niunzu about 2 months before the ambush, or in around a month or whatever. And we went out there to see what the problem was. There was a whole lot of people dead, and that was a bit scary.
It was our job to repair any bridges. So we kept doing this day after day. We'd fix the bridge, they'd pull it down. We'd go back, fix the bridge, they'd pull it down. It was a matter of perseverance. So that went on for a couple of weeks. So they weren't too angry with us. We weren't too angry with them. But then a few things started to happen.
Bhí Chombe ag choristeach a chud gendarm, faoi cheannas haidúirí túrastal belga chabána, chun na Balúba chlí ag leagan a gcuid bailte go talamh. Bhí na Balúba ag bainne díaltasmach raibh Chombe. Leis an scéal a dhéanana níos casta, bhí na gendarm ag úsáid fetheclí a bhí cosú leo siúda d'úsáid na Hairnig, agus don na Balúba, bhreanig na Hairnig bána ina gultacha tropacacha anachasú leis na hific ag belgacha.
They turned against us. The Balubas turned against us. They seemed to believe that we were maybe taken over where the Belgians, colonials, had left off. That was my feeling about it. Where one day they seemed to be friendly enough, angry but friendly. They started to become more hostile. And then we have the events of what happened on the 8th of November.
An 8ú lá de bhí na saona 1960, dog Lieutenant Kevin Gleeson, a Las Hennessy Sergeant Hugh Gaynor, agus 9 uair eile an garastún ag Niemba, le dul patrol. Tháinig siad ar chruichid briste Awan Lulu A.
And I told him, whatever you say or whatever you do, be very, very careful with the Balubas. They are very, very dangerous. No problems, he said. They know we are the United Nations and that we are here to help them.
Somebody rolled out Baluba cats, and of course I put out my head to see, and I saw a fella with a leopard skin hat and a bow and arrow, and another fella with a white shirt, a pair of shorts and a bow and arrow. And Gleeson and Gaynor went down to talk to them.
The attitude from the Irish was that they thought that everyone was friendly. We can do that, we can go to that village. And and that took a long time for me to convince this is war.
Then the Balubas came from behind, screaming, shouting. That was the last moment for them to man all weapons.
In our tradition, there's an in-base appreciation that violence solves nothing, and that you should release a shot or fire a shot just in the last extremity.
The Balubas then attacked. Lieutenant Gleeson tried to say Jambo, and then he got an arrow.
And he went down on Monday, now he the Gustav, and he told us to withdraw into the bush. Take cover, lads. We're all going to be killed.
And they attacked from, in principle, from all directions. And it was only a question of time before everybody was killed.
The patrol should have been back by 4 o'clock, 1600 hours. That's normal procedure, because at 1800, 6 o'clock, it would be dark. So it came to 5 o'clock, 1700 hours, no sign. So by darkness then, it was obvious they weren't going to come. We were informed that a rescue group was en route from Albertville, 200 kilometres. It was going to take them many hours to get to us. We couldn't launch a rescue. We had no transport, that was all gone with the patrol. So about 5 o'clock in the morning, 0500, we could see in the east the vehicles coming. Myself and 7 other guys were detailed.
We came with the rescue unit the day after.
I proceeded into the bush, so 60 paces. And in a small clearing I found the bodies of Lieutenant Gleeson and Sergeant Gaynor. They had been badly mutilated.
We then carried on the search, and we found several bodies.
one body we didn't find, and Tony Brown's we didn't find.
After 10 minutes, Joe Fitzpatrick appeared.
I feel that I'm just a very, very lucky man to be sitting here today. Jesus and Mary, I nearly pray to them every day for getting out of Niunzu. Of course, you had people that said you ran away. You know, you're sitting in a pub or something and you're still running, and you had all these remarks, innuendos, is that what you call them? No one ever apologised. It took me 47 years to get this Medal of Honour. Me family name restored. I'm contented enough.
I mi meh nídag seaca bhí sráid na bhaile clia dubh díine dina gordas. Bhí na slóite an a ríis ar lá fuair a mí na sána, ach ní ra le clustáil an lá sin, ach builín an romí agus clig sépéil. Fada sa chuig an tucra trí chathair a bhí faoi bhráin. Bhí Michael Colton ag tiúnlachan na sochraide, agus ag daileáil lena threagóid farsanta hain. Bhí a leanamh mic cailte ag Michael agus a bhean Lily.
He died on the 31st of October, and on the 2nd of October, or the 2nd of November, I should say, I was informed of his death.
So I went down then to the barracks to ask them to send him home, and they told me if I sent his fare, they'd get him home.
At that time, there was no repatriation unless you were able to pay your own fare home.
But I hadn't got the money, because we had very small money from the army that time. And I said I haven't got the money. So I had to get the child buried myself.
They decided they'd send me home with the bodies as part of the escort. This was 8 or 9 days after the lads had been killed. The stench was incredible. As you can imagine, it was the worst trip I ever had in my life.
But then he came home and he had to go back again.
I ní líocháin Niemba, tugu riflí FN súlanacha donna trúpaí. Bhí tréimhse síochána sa Congo, rud a hála go hanamh, agus níor chur mór an choíle as don chatlána detal amachán I mí anar nídeag seasca hain. Ach, bhí triblóid a tacht. Cuig bhí dar gion, I mehebh, tháinig catlán eile go dtí an Congo. Bhí na céta saidúr túrastal eile archa ag uachtarán Chombe I gceantar Katanga, chun an gendarmerie stiúra agus iad a chur gcuine aontú Katanga leis an chuid eile gon tír.
You knew it wasn't an amateur outfit that was going against, it was very professional. They were being paid for by the Katangi's army or the government basically there.
Cheol na náisiún aontaithe oibriocht rum punch. Bhí sé mar aimach go gach saidúr túrastal bán a gháil agus a dhíbert ón gceantar.
There was a likelihood of 31% casualties in the operation Rum Punch. We're told to be ready for Reveille at 4 o'clock in the morning, that the company had been tasked with taking over the gendarmerie headquarters.
Deire leis an oibriocht. Tháinig sé níor dua winter Katanga, agus grú a gríoch bhealach chomhéifeach dua le, nar scuilú fiú orchar amháin, ach níor mhair an rás sin a bhád.
Mercenaries, what were shipped out, a lot of them were back in within a couple of weeks again. Operation Mortar kicked off early in the morning of the 13th of September.
Mar chuid den oibriocht, eisiíoch barátas de gháil uachtarán Mwais Chombe, chomáile saidúirí túrastal agus cóirleoirí eachtarnacha, ón meilg den chuid is mó. Idir an dá lín, crú saidúirí ó chompántas an tríocha cuaigú Cathláin, faoi steward Countford Pat Quinlan, go baile beag mínadóireachta dar a banam Jadotville. Bhí siad an chun aon siaránnig Belgacha a bhí fós an a chosint.
We saw the last of C Company coming out of Jadotville as we went in. So they were after cutting the numbers from 300 to 150 odd. So we didn't stand much of a chance at all. We were sent in to protect the Belgians. who didn't want protection. Because the reason that the Swedes and C Company left it was because of the hostility towards them.
Ach dúirt an Nordathe an Gean Cheathrú in Elizabethville, gur chóir an chompántas fan af san áit na ráisiad. Thug Quinlan ordú don na fear a good cosintí a dheangniú.
They were preventing us from any movement at all, and this type of standoff went on for maybe 2 or 3 days, not allowing us freedom.
In Elizabethville, níor of ada gur umpig eibríocht mórtar, isteach in a coga. Maríoch 3 haidúr éarnach sa trid. I Jadotville, bhí droch scéalach fannacht ar Cheanford Pat Quinlan, agus fear chompántais a.
We were saying mass and 3 trucks drove in full of troops. They thought they had nothing to do only take over our camp. But one of our sergeants, Sergeant John Monaghan, maybe he wasn't a good Catholic, but he wasn't at mass. And he saw what was happening. He jumped into the machine gun trench and he fired a few bursts over their heads.
That more or less saved us. We gave the fellas at mass time to regroup more or less, to get into their trenches and get defending the place. You know, the whole lot of them above, no weapons, most of them, you know.
A couple of hours after then, all hell broke loose.
They started to put fire in our direction and we returned it.
Lean an tunsaí a rai ar fan lé. Bhí na fear ina drinchí Brite faoi Ghrian na Africa.
Then our water and electricity supplies were cut off after the evening of the first day. And whatever water was stored, it was stored in any kind of a container, including the baths in some of the villas that we had allocated to us by the people from civilian procurement. And in one particular case, somebody decided to have a bath in the water, and that's finished that as drinking water.
An sin, baggart eile, tháinig scard etalán Katanga ag scradíal in a dro, ag scuile gábhuam a gard a lár fuinte chosantaí an chompántais.
There was a soldier, he said, "Tell me, will we ever get out of here alive?" he said. I reassured the poor devil. He was afraid. Basically, he was afraid, and he was worrying about his future.
Ar an ceathrú lá de bhean fór, tháinig scéal gur an na saidúirí túristal agus muintir Katanga ag iarra sus córacha idirbheartú le Cheanford Quinlan, agus gomach fórsa fórinte ar a bhealach, teimhiste go chúpla uairich laig.
They looked for a ceasefire to pick up their dead, which Pat Quinlan agreed to. And when they had their dead all picked up, they broke the ceasefire.
Bhí beagnach seachtain caite faoi léigear ag Jadotville, agus bhí an scar detlán Katangach fós a gúnsaí, ach anois, bhí na hairnig dá raggart den an nardam hain.
When things were getting tough, they weren't getting the better of us. They looked for another ceasefire. So immediately then, our company commander, Pat Quinlan, got on to headquarters in Elizabethville. He was told that there was ceasefire talks going on and everything was going very well. I suppose he thought then, well, if I don't agree to this, well then it's going to affect him back in Elizabethville. So he did agree to it.
Dumping gá íireach tarthála arás, mar gheall ar fíochmhar in na Katangig, a bhí cuineál grím deangan ar ruthid lufíre, an taon bhealach isteach sa bhaile.
Then I remember seeing this black minister or whatever he was. Next thing, Pat Quinlan was sent for. And he was told that we were being taken prisoners. Now, to be taken a prisoner during a ceasefire is against everything the Geneva Convention ever stood for. A ceasefire is a ceasefire. But then again, they broke it again.
When eventually they took us, they wouldn't believe that none of us were killed. They actually went around poking in holes and loose air to see what was the bodies then. You know, it's hard to believe after 5 days nobody was killed.
That's the way it was. We were prisoners then for about 6 weeks.
We were brought down from Jadotville to Camp Massart for a negotiation about our release and trading over Katangese prisoners held elsewhere by the UN. There was no negotiation worthwhile. We were loaded on the buses again and took us out to a place called Nzilo 1 camp. The most of the people that came out were women and children roaring for blood and Irish flesh. And the guards weren't worried too much at first. But then machetes or panga knives started to appear. So we were moved into Colwezi to a compound, which later became a UN compound in itself. Then on the 25th of October, we were told to go on a sightseeing tour again on the buses. But it was kind of pre-arranged that we weren't coming back.
The Katangese soldier that was driving the bus, I would sit to the driver's left. And the orders were that if there was any sign of them bringing us back, a good hefty fella beside me, he would lift your man out of the driver's seat. And I would move in. I would just reach in and grab the steering wheel, sit in and go through the roadblocks. But we were exchanged and we didn't have to.
We headed in to where there was an old airport, and that was the first we saw of UN vehicles. There was Katangese on one side and UN at the other. We were debussed and fell in. The Katangese were debussed and fell in. We marched up one side and they marched down the other side. And we were loaded onto trucks and taken back to Leopold Farm and allocated very good accommodation inside the cows full of mosquitoes. But at least we could say we were free, you know.
Agus deire bhí sé hart, agus still etlán leis an chéad chuid gon tríocha cúigú cathlán bhaile clia. Ach tar éis na fáilte críúla ó chomráidí cóirde agus clán, tháinig ciúnas, agus an sin thosa an chaint.
We actually got a cool reception back home because we surrendered. They didn't know the situation. They didn't know how it happened. They didn't know there was a ceasefire in place. They just thought we came out and surrendered. The company were looked down upon for many, many years, 46 years.
Agus muintir na hÉireann ag trid ag Jadotville, fuair Dag Hammarskjöld, rúnaí na Náisiún Aontaithe bás I dimpeiste Eteláin, agus a bhealach chuig an ródéis le idir bhartúí dhéana le Uachtarán Tchambé. Deathraigh seasamh na Náisiún Aontaithe tháríthe. Gheall an rúnaí gníomhach tant, go núsáidach siad neart chun deire a chur le scara Katanga ón Congo. Fada sa bhí fear an tríocha séú cathlainn san éar a mealach ag an Congo, bhí orchar á scuile in Elizabethville.
We went on to Leopoldville, the capital. It was then we were told that there was a lot of trouble in Elizabethville. And we got absolution on the tarmac from our chaplain before we got on the plane. And when we were on the plane, we had to change from our khaki uniform into our bush greens. And we had to break open boxes of ammunition and load up and everything like that. Because we didn't know what we were going to do when we got there, whether we'd even be able to land or not.
At Elizabethville, preparing to land, one of the engines on the plane was knocked out from ground fire by the gendarmerie. They counted 40 puncture holes in the fuselage.
There was chaos on the plane because people were jumping left, right and centre and didn't know where to go. Some people were even lying on the floor of the plane. But of course, I thought in my wisdom was I'd get my helmet, scrunch myself up as small as possible and sit on it. So I made myself as small a target as possible, which turned out to be a good idea because consequently, later on in years, I got married and had 5 children. So I kind of protected my assets, as the fella says.
We eventually landed and there was fuel flying all over the place. But that plane had to be unloaded at the double. The biggest fear the Yanks had was us wearing hobnail boots, which would cause sparks on the tarmac. And we could have been involved in an inferno. But luckily it didn't happen.
Bhí an mon champa acu ag ferm Hréice, Leopold Farm, áitar a locht an tríocha cúigú cathlainn a bhí fós sa tír faoi ionsaí Hanahéin.
Now, we didn't know what Leafville Farm was, where it was, how far it was, or how we were going to get there, except we knew we were just getting into trucks. And of course, it was getting dark, and the trucks had to move out with no headlights on because of the enemy fire.
It looked like hell. And for the first time since I joined the army, I found out my helmet was too light. The big steel pot sitting on your head gives you a headache. But when the first shot was fired, you want to get the helmet and pull the two sides of it down to your ankles. We were obviously scared skinny. Everybody seemed to be shooting at everybody.
Some of the lads was saying, oh, if I knew it was like this, I wouldn't be here, you know.
Our first casualty we suffered on the 8th of December. Corporal Mick Fallon was killed by mortar fire.
Father Crane was the head chaplain with us, and he said the decade of the rosary, and just when we finished the rosary, he gave his last gasp and died.
As far as we could figure out, they weren't from the enemy, they were our own mortars, one dropped short. I think the Swedes was firing them at the time, at that particular time anyway. I'm not sure of that now, but I heard after that was one of our own to drop short. Unfortunate it was, but those things happen.
Níra ámar beheag locht an tríocha séu catláin, a gumráidí a chuine.
It was straight into the trenches to relieve the 35th Battalion. It was during the rainy season, tropical downpours, straight into the trenches. We were under constant fire.
The sensible thing is to get yourself a good trench that you can get cover. Problem was that in some areas it's very difficult to dig, and the other thing was the downpours in the rainy season. You'd end up with your trench 3/4 full of water in a short time.
The worst thing about me there was the night time. You didn't hear a sound. You knew your mates were around you. But if your lads set in, you start thinking you were on your own in the middle of nowhere, you know.
Bhí fórsaí na náisiún Aontaithe in animas brú amach I dro Elizabethville, agus siomhan na stratéisica timpeall na Cathrach a go bháil.
The first action was on the crossroads, Liège crossroads. We were there for 4 days under severe mortar fire, sniper fire, and the lot.
They had a mobile mortar, which was on the back of a mobile pickup truck. And they just up and down, fire off 5 rounds of mortar. And you could hear that, and the other one would land the other side. One of them landed and got Joe Desmond in the side.
I was getting the orders back from whoever was doing the observation, giving back the orders on the field phone. And I was giving the orders to the corporal on charge of the mortars. And I got a direct hit myself. One of the bombs landed beside me and blew me to bits. So, had plenty of hold to me. The sniper opened up and got me as well.
You can't guard yourself a bit against mortar bombs because you just fall. And if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, they're going to hit you. And unfortunately, they hit me.
And Sergeant Paddy Mulcahy, he was after being up to us, and he gave us cigarettes and soup. He was just come back down when the mortar exploded. And we heard then that Paddy Mulcahy was wounded as well.
Before we went to the Congo, I had fired something like 3 bombs out of a mortar. And in Elizabethville, I fired up, I think it's around 1,000.
Before we were reinforced, we were there for 3 days. And we were reinforced by number 3 platoon. And this guy came out of the bush, out of the trees behind me, and he pulled back the trees and he looked at me and he says, Jesus, 67, I thought yous were all dead.
So I was injured and I was left there for a couple of days, I suppose, in this house while everybody else was going about their dangerous tasks, and I was just lying in the bed nice and happy with myself, getting fed and I wasn't wet, so that was a great thing for me. Until then there was an operation to take the tunnel.
Druhid Iarnróid le Carvalach dúbalta híos faoi a bhí sa tulán suntasach seo. Agus bhí sé á chosan ag gendarmerie agus saidúirí tuaristal Katangach. Bailach rí-hábhachtach isteach ag príomh-chathair Katanga a bhí ann.
They had an element of height, they had great observation on you, you wouldn't have great observation on them. And they had good protection.
There was quite a lot of them there. There were about 700 of them there. Like we were only about 150.
Ní raibh aim amháin ag Lieutenant Peter Feely, Lieutenant Sean Norton agus Lieutenant Paddy Reardon an Tollán a Gháil.
We were an Irish battalion, and it was the only time that the Defence Forces here have ever put in a battalion in attack for real. Neither before that, nor since.
I was the 3rd platoon in reserve, and I was to follow the route of Lieutenant Paddy Reardon's platoon, number 1 platoon.
Ag a ceathrachlogar maidin an séoládéag de bhí na nolag, faoi bháiste chrám agus in norchadas na híthe, tugu an tardú dulchan tosig.
Paddy Reardon and myself were the lead, and Peter Feely and the headquarters were behind us. And we moved in on the railway track, because that led right to the tunnel itself.
And when we got up to the carriages, we heard voices. And Lieutenant Reardon got down on his right knee and put up his left hand for us to stop. Now, I was directly behind him, but I moved off to the left, to the edge of the left track, so I could see front. Now, Wickham was directly behind him, and within a matter of seconds, we heard a sound which sounded like a fire order, and it was accompanied with machine gun fire in our direction.
I was supposed to be on the left, Paddy on the right, but in the shuffling around in the dark and the rain and all that, the company man put Paddy on the left and me on the right. And when Paddy got to see me at some stage, he said, "Look, we're on the wrong side." I said, "Paddy, it doesn't matter." So Paddy went to the company command, and the company commander changed us. And the attack went in, and Paddy was killed.
Now I looked over, Reardon was, the platoon commander was flat out, and he didn't move. And I began to suspect that he was shot.
I remember seeing Charlie Connolly, who was our medic, out over the body of Pat Reardon. This was maybe within the first 15 minutes or 20 of coming under fire. And obviously he was dead.
We lost Lieutenant Reardon and Andy Wickham. Quite a lot of people were wounded as well. I helped remove Andy from the tracks. We took him to kind of an old hospital that was there. It was evacuated.
We got to a position, as it happened, it was the morgue of the hospital complex. At this stage, the bodies of Paddy Reardon and Gunnar Wickham, Andy Wickham, were on the slabs behind us in the morgue.
I went back to my platoon. We were confused then because there was no one to give us any orders.
At this stage, I must confess I had said goodbye to my family about 3 times because I was sure it was finished. We were only about 30 yards from the machine guns. So I decided that if I'm going to go, I'm going to go firing.
The rain was a godsend in one way because the Katangese army and mercenaries were out of their trenches and they were inside in the railway carriages.
I shouted to Ferguson, who was behind me. He would be a good bit behind me because in the back of my section was strung out along the railway. And then I got into communication with him. I told him to fire. He said, where to fire? And I said, fire the left carriage. He shouted back to me, he says, you'll be in the danger area. Next thing, Kelly gets shot. So they were just picking us off, and as far as I was concerned, I didn't care I was in the danger area. So I told him to go ahead.
Fuoin trá seo, bhí an chuideile an bheithil éarnach ag tríd chomá.
We could see the trace coming towards us. And it was pretty horrendous.
They used to go for the big gunner and the radio man. The radio man was obviously first on the list, and I was second.
With the anti-tank gun, you had to stand in the open, fire it.
Now, explosion like that, you've pinpointed yourself. It's highly dangerous.
Charlie was the firer, I was the number 2. And I loaded, Charlie fired, hit the bridge.
Lieutenant Norton said to me, would you take another shot at the carriage? I said, on my own.
And he said, like, both of you come with me. So the 2 of us went out, and he fired, and he got the second one.
Ferguson only had 4 shells. So the next thing I seen, the 5th, 6th shell exploding. So I knew other than Ferguson had now engaged the carriers.
So when I hit the carriages first time, silence then for then on.
The enemy ran away. They just ran away. And I remember shouting, I screamed, big cheer, I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't. At that stage I was sure I was going to be killed.
There was still firing coming at us because we were running up to the railway station itself.
We were expecting a counter-attack, which didn't materialise.
So we not only move in and take the tunnel then. So we took positions up on the top of the tunnel and held it.
Bhí a gospóirí timpeall Elizabethville, bainte amach ag na Súlanig, ag Cathlan Ghorca na Hind, agus ag na Hétópic chomá.
When we took the tunnel, we must have been a month on it.
Sentries were posted. And it got back to some sense of normality.
One day, a jeep came out, I had anti-tank trained on it. They were Congolese soldiers. I didn't fire it because I'd have watched the point in killing people for nothing. So I relaxed and let them go about their business.
Were we justified in what we were doing? Yes, we were. We were under the mandate from the UN. But there was the thing comes into your mind about peace enforcement and peacekeeping.
Nuair a tháinig deire leis an cá, bhí 8 gomadí síochána 10 marmh, agus duine agus 20 acab gortathe go donna.
They brought me to a hospital which was only a house, and they'd done the operation in the bivouac, or a tent, or whatever you call it. Sergeant Paddy McCahey was in the little bed beside me, but he actually died beside me.
Curú an lábhach ar fionraí ar an níl lá déag de bhína nolog, fadas a tháinig an rialtas Katangach, rialtas lárnach an Congo, agus na náisiún aontaithe le chéile de chainte na síochána. Mar a tharlaíonn na gcuimhlant ar bith, dí láithríoch annachchuid síomhéaltaigh. Tír muintear an Congo cosint ó na náisiún aontaithe. Thuchar na Súlanig agus na Héarnig na mílta go na daoine seo a bhoga ag siomh faoi le, áit ar thóg siad a níd an héin.
I wasn't familiar with what a refugee camp was then. And it was just anything they could make a shelter with. Basically, that's all they used. They corrugated tins, canvas, bits of trees. Some of the houses that the Belgians had left, they'd go in and loot the houses that the Belgians were in. Like, take the roofs off it, take the beams out of it, take the floorboards up, take everything up. These people tried to get themselves as much shelter as they could under conditions, because it was the rainy season and it was going to last for a couple of months.
I measc na defach, chroigh grúpa óg na jeunesse, tribloid leanúnach.
We wanted to check whether when the refugees started coming, that they were really refugees and not something else. Because many of these were not refugees. They were just out for robbing, killing people and so on.
Le suas le caracha míle díine gampa na defach, bhí obair mhór a gceist an tríocha séú Cathlan, sal ar ilsiad a bhaile. Dúlgus garda, patrol, dúlgus cuideachta, áis bhíchane agus lábhseáil stóras. Curú an tríocha seachtú Cathlan go dtí an Congo I mealtaine 1962. Tháinig ceannairí nuach an cín sa rialtas lárnach a Leopoldville, agus bhí síocháin bhí compórtach I réim I Katanga.
Our battalion were very lucky in that we were the 37th. The 32nd had a reasonably okay time. The 33rd Battalion had a rough time. 34th Battalion had a reasonable time. 35th and 6th Battalion were involved in heavy fighting. We arrived while everybody was catching their breath, and shortly after we departed, the 38th Battalion were in fighting again.
Well, I did another trip with the 38th Battalion, and shall we say it was payback time. The gendarmerie were driven back into what then was Northern Rhodesia, and that were annihilated.
In anar na bliana 1963, ahéan tíog Katanga leis an chuideile gon phoblacht. Bhí an tír fós éintethe ag deir na bliana. Bhí socracht fola túl baint amach. Tháinig an céad chahlan éarnach faoi stiúr na náisiún éintethe go dtí an Congo ar an 8 láfiad de júl 1960. Dag na saidúirí déirnach an Congo ar an 3 lá de bheitheh 1964. Ag chuir deire le páirt na hÉireann sa bheachtas.
Certainly by the end of the Congo operation, our soldiers would have been well skilled in everything they were doing. The casualty rate was high, of course. The psychological casualties were many.
When you came back, for a while, you were still mentally on operations overseas, and it must have been hell for people who had to live with you.
A lot of young men who had never left Ireland and had no idea where they were going or what they were to do or anything else found it difficult to cope.
God love her, my wife of 48 years now said, I used to jump out of bed every night. Where's me gun? Where's me gun? Where's me gun? And she said, it's okay, John, it's okay. It's under your pillow. What she used to do, now she was a school teacher. She knew nothing about the army. But I used to sleep with a hole under my pillow every night. That was me gun. It's okay, it's under your pillow, it's under your pillow. Your gun is under your pillow. That's the debriefing we got.
I got involved with the Irish and United Nations Veterans Association, which we founded because we reckoned that our soldiers had been adversely affected by service overseas, and we wanted to do something for them. 20 years later, we feel that we've done a lot of good.
The army had a good effect on me for some reason. I don't know why. It doesn't have a good effect on everybody. I came out of it unscathed, really. I was fascinated with the experience we had in the Congo.
I didn't think about what we achieved or didn't achieve. I just, I was just glad to go home, and I was looking forward to going back again, but unfortunately I didn't get back again. I loved it out there. I loved the 6 months.
They were the true pioneers of peacekeeping, and through their courage, their dedication and their sacrifice began a proud tradition of service by the Defence Forces in the cause of international peace and security, a tradition which remains today.
The greatest adventure of my life. It changed my life for the better. I'm a better man because of it today. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I was prepared for whatever came after. As the saying goes, it makes a man of you.
It made me grow from a gosson to a man.
Health-wise, any morning, you pull up your britches. It's a good day. Whoever pulls it off that night is their problem.
When I look back now, and when people ask me, I always say we were extremely poorly equipped, poorly uniformed, poorly provisioned. But it's funny, when you were there at that time, I suppose it would be too much to say that you didn't know any better, but you just made do with what you had and made the best of what you had. As I say, when you look back in it 20, 30, 40 years afterwards, you say, wasn't it appalling? But at least it was the start of our army becoming fixed on service overseas and improving the equipment and clothing and everything else necessary for proper deployment overseas. So it was a start, but we were young. It was a big adventure. We didn't care.
Once a soldier, always a soldier. The things that are impressed on you as a young man stay with you forever. We'll never be anything else but soldiers.
It's a pleasure
to welcome each and every one of you to this house. The Irish United Nations Veterans Association is so welcome. It's good to see the blueberry. We have one of the finest peacekeeping forces in the world, and we are very, very grateful, because that did not happen by accident. It doesn't happen by accident. It happens because of the efforts that have been made by people like you.